look, they say that one of the keys to great podcasting for the long haul is you got to make it evergreen. You don't want to be saying a bunch of stuff that's about what's happening right now, because then people listen to it later and they feel alienated. Also, hi, person who's listening later. It can be right now for us. It doesn't have to feel weird. But I do want to talk about something that happened this week. The Super Bowl got played between two teams. I won't say who they are. That way it feels a little more evergreen, right? Like this could be any time. The game went to overtime, and the one team won the coin toss, and thus they get to pick whether they kick off the ball or receive the ball in overtime. Now, the rules of overtime in professional football in my country have changed in the playoffs so that it is now by far the better strategic choice to kick the ball than to receive the ball in overtime. And the one team won the toss. I thought, I mean, they're lucky. I know what they're going to do. And they opted to receive the ball. Well, that's the exact wrong thing. It's like choosing to be the away team in a baseball game. You want to bat last. You want to be the home team. What are you doing? And after the team that won the toss and incorrectly elected to receive the kick, after they lost the game, the players on the team admitted in the locker room, we did not even know the rules of overtime. And if we had, strategically, it would have been wiser to do the other thing. Likewise, I think there are people we're running into here in the Old Testament who just have no idea what the ground rules are. They don't understand the covenants, the deals that God made with his chosen people. They're outsiders to it. They're inattentive to it. I mean, maybe ethnically, they're not even a part of this deal. And they operate in kind of a different way than the people who do know the ground rules and understand exactly how everything works. And if this happens, then this happens. And if that happens, then this happens. And let me tell you, my friends, Ezra and Nehemiah, they're two guys who know the rules. They know exactly how everything works and what God has laid out. They are students of history. They know that God means it and that he'll do exactly what he said. That is, that if his chosen people, the Jews, the Hebrew people, the Israelites, if they honor and obey him, he's going to bless them in this very unique relationship. And if they disobey him, God is going to punish them. And Nehemiah here has just got some terrible news in the action-packed, lightning-fast, right out of the gate, we're just doing stuff and things are happening, opening chapter of the book of Nehemiah. He's got some rough news about the state of things in Jerusalem. He hears that those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down. Its gates have been burned with fire. Well, a simpler person who doesn't understand the ground rules of what's going on here and doesn't know what they're supposed to do when the coin flip happens, they might have looked at that and thought, all right, well, we just got to be way more ruthless. We got to lie more, cheat more, be willing to get more dirty. I mean, who knows what they might have thought. But a student of history who knows the ground rules and who knows about the covenant between God and his chosen people like Nehemiah, that's not his response. He sits down, he grieves, he knows why this is happening. And then after some time of mourning and fasting, he goes back to God and he says, we looked at this part of the prayer of Nehemiah yesterday, verse 5, O Lord, God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and obey his commands. See, he knows the rules of overtime. He understands exactly how all of this works. He's saying, I know the rules, you know the rules, you're playing by them. And then he goes on to say, we have not played properly. You know the rules and honor them. We know the rules and don't. Verse 6, let your ear be attentive and your eyes be open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's house, have committed against you. Now, there's this principle in the Old Testament about sin being generational in this deal between God and his chosen people. It's a very unique deal in history. We don't see any other ones like this. And there's this concept of sin being projected forward into time by what the fathers, the heads of households, get wrong. And this, of course, is another one of those places where the sensibilities and the state of the world in the ancient world, the Iron Age, the Bronze Age, is just miles different than the sensibilities of today. We don't think in terms of households anymore. We don't think in terms of the household kind of gets one societal vote, has one societal reputation, lives under one roof and operates as almost its own little micro kingdom or tribe or clan within the larger society. We don't think like that. We think in terms of individual units, maybe still to some extent in individual single nuclear family units, not the extended family units that people thought in terms of back in the day. But back in the day, your reputation was your family's, and future generations would own what you have. So it would have been weird and inappropriate for Nehemiah to be like, well, I did some stuff wrong and that covers it. No, it'd make perfect sense for someone like this who knows the rules of overtime, who understands the deal between God and the Jewish people, for him to be like, I got to cover everything. It's my people, it's my household, it's my ancestors, and it's me. This touches every aspect of this. I own it. And just like Ezra, he takes it upon himself. I like that. I respect it. I aspire to be so honest and forthright with my own shortcomings when I talk to God or others. Verse 7, we have acted very wickedly toward you. We have not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws that you gave your servant Moses. So for somebody who knows the rules of overtime, what he has just declared is we lose. We failed. Whatever fate befalls us is exactly the one you said would befall us. We deserve it. We have it coming. Which means that if there is to be more to this prayer, it's going to be a pivot toward mercy and action. And that's what we get. Verse 8. Remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses, saying, if you're unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. There's a lot going on there. Look at what Nehemiah is doing. He's imitating some of the impulses that a lot of the great characters throughout the Old Testament, particularly the patriarchs, have undertaken, right? You remember some of these stories? It's okay if you don't. I know a lot of you are running through this stuff for the first time. I know a lot of you have been around it quite a bit. For those of you who remember some of this, what do you dig back to here? Abraham, right? In his pleading for Sodom and Gomorrah over Lot, his family member, he's almost negotiating with God. How about Moses saying, oh, well, don't do this. What'll the nations say? It benefits you to be merciful here. And how about Job? He negotiates with God. It goes very poorly for him. God is like, just stop. Your friends are idiots. They mean well or whatever. Big time paraphrase is mine. But no, I'm God. Let's take a tour of the cosmos. I'm just going to ask you some rhetorical questions that you'll sound like an idiot if you answer. And the point is, this negotiation is not going to end well for you because you're Job and I'm God. But also Habakkuk, the prophet at the end of the Old Testament, he seems to negotiate with God. That book opens with Habakkuk saying stuff like, how long, oh Lord, how long is stuff going to be like this? And why do you do this? And why do you punish the righteous with the wicked, or even the wicked with the wickeder? I guess that's more how he says it. And God seems to enter into something of a negotiation with him as well. Is it really a negotiation when you're talking with the almighty knower of all things, who's existed forever and has never changed and never learned anything? Because that is how the Bible, and I would argue reason, holds out God having to be. Well, no, I suppose in a linear timeline sense of the world we live in, it isn't really a negotiation. Because God already knew you were going to ask, and he already knew what he was going to say in return. But also God is very incarnational throughout the Bible. He's going out of his way to take all of that glory and majesty and at times mask it enough that humans can interact with him a little bit. And he shows up in ways that are relatable, especially, Jesus is a pretty good example of that. But not just Jesus. In the Old Testament, he does it as well. And so there is a strong tradition that Nehemiah is drawing on here as somebody who knows the ground rules, knows the rules of overtime. He knows what the deal is with the covenant. He lays it out really clearly, doesn't he, at the beginning of his prayer, when he says literally the God who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and obey his commands. But he leaves off the part about and also punishes those who, that was very interesting. And then again, in the second part of the prayer that I just read to you right now in verses 8 and 9, remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses. If you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. Then he goes on to talk about another clause in there about how you put that back together. Nehemiah is a guy who knows the ground rules. We see that in how he talks about the covenant. He knows if you get it right, there's blessings. If you get it wrong, there's punishment. But he's also a guy who seems to know the ground rules of interacting with God, how to pray. Maybe that's not how you pray now. I don't know. I guess I've never really thought about that. Now I'm on the spot because I'm talking in this microphone and things are just happening. But at least in the Old Testament, as strange as it might seem to try to debate or negotiate with the all-knowing God of everything and the maker and sustainer of all things, he seems to invite it, even welcome it. At times he smacks people down a little bit for doing it, as is the case with some of the examples that I just mentioned. But still, it seems like it's not entirely automatically presumptuous for people who were living under the umbrella of this covenant with Moses of the Old Testament deal to really talk very candidly with God in these ways. And Nehemiah is kind of approaching God the way we see characters approach Cyrus and Darius and Xerxes and Artaxerxes. There's an acknowledgement of the authority, and there's this very subtle and gentle approach to suggesting a way that points to his great majesty, that if we were to change and get this right, remember, you said this thing once. Does that still apply? What if we did that? It's like he's feeling it out. And it's a very human interaction between him and God. And even the specifics of what he's throwing out here are not unprecedented. Just a couple of books of the Bible earlier, there's language that we will look at tomorrow that Nehemiah seems to be echoing here, where Nehemiah says, now remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses, saying, if you're unfaithful, I'll scatter you among the nations. It's the downside of the deal. But then he goes on, verse 9, and this is sort of our teaser for tomorrow. But if you return to me and obey my command, so then even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. So I think what we're going to see here is that Nehemiah isn't just appealing to words from earlier in the Bible that some clever person said to God. I think what we're going to see here is that he is appealing to words God said himself in a very profound moment in the history, a real high point moment in the history of the relationship and the intimacy between God and his chosen people. And we will dip back into that next time around. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.